Interventions to reduce media violence use and promote media literacy. It has become clear in the course of this chapter that media presentations of violence and explicit sex may affect viewers' aggressive behavior through a number of different routes. What then can be done to prevent or mitigate these adverse effects? Theoretical models that explain the long-term effects of exposure to violent media as a result of observational learning, aggressive scripts, disinhibition, and desensitization suggest that interventions should start at an early age when aggressive scripts and patterns of behavior are not yet consolidated and therefore more amenable to change. Compared with the large number of studies that have sought to demonstrate an effect of media violence use on aggression, effective interventions are scarce and directed mostly at children and adolescents. Existing studies have addressed one or both of two outcomes: restricted consuming, either in terms of the overall reduction in media exposure or the reduction of exposure to violent content, and critical consuming, designed to promote an understanding of the mechanisms by which violence is presented as acceptable, successful, and detached from negative consequences. Focusing on restricted overall media use, Robinson et al. 2001 demonstrated the efficacy of an intervention with 3rd and 4th graders over a period of 6 months. The intervention included a 10-day complete turnoff of television, videos, and video games, followed by a prescribed budget of no more than 7 hours of screen time per week. Participants in the intervention group showed not only a reduction in media use compared with the control group, but also a significant decrease in peer-rated aggression, as well as observed verbal aggression from baseline to post-test. However, no parallel intervention effects were apparent in parent ratings of aggression. Byrne 2009, on the other hand, focused exclusively on the aspect of critical consuming. She compared two intervention conditions with a control group in a sample of 4th and 5th graders. In the basic condition, students received a lesson on the negative effects of media violence, how to avoid these effects, and how to critically evaluate the aggressive behavior of media characters, using violent clips as examples. In the activity condition, participants were given the same instruction but were additionally required to write a paragraph about what they had learned and were videotaped reading it aloud. No difference was found between the activity and the control conditions immediately post-intervention and at the 6-month follow-up, whereas the basic condition showed a significant increase in the willingness to use aggression, indicating a boomerang effect. Using a combined approach of reducing media violence use and promoting critical consuming, Ross and Coder et al. 2004 conducted an intervention over a 12-month period with children from 1st to 3rd grade. The intervention was designed to cut down the amount of violent television viewing and to reduce the identification with violent TV characters. It produced different effects for boys and girls. Girls in the intervention group scored higher than girls in the controlled group on knowledge about the effects of TV violence and lower on TV violence viewing, as well as identification with violent TV characters. The effect of the intervention on reducing peer-nominated aggression was significant only for boys. In a subsequent study with children from 1st to 4th grade, Rosencoder et al. 2009 implemented a similar program over a 7-month period with an immediate post-intervention measurement and an 8-month follow-up. Participants in the intervention group reported watching less violent television and expressed more critical attitudes about media violence than those in the control group, both immediately post-intervention and 8 months later. The short-term effect of reduced identification with violent characters was no longer present at the follow-up. No effect of the intervention on peer-rated aggression was found, either immediately post-intervention or at the 8-month follow-up. Both restricted consuming and critical consuming were targeted in an intervention developed by Mahler et al. 2012 for use with adolescents in Germany, with restricted consuming directed at violent media content only. The intervention consisted of 5 weekly sessions of 2 school periods each, in which students worked on 2 modules. Restricted use of media violence, which involved keeping a diary of media use as a baseline, and then setting targets and developing skills for reducing time spent with violent media, and critical appraisal of violent media in their effect on users, which involved experiential and didactic elements demonstrating the psychological processes underlying media violence effects, as described earlier in this chapter and shown in figures 6.3 and 6.4. A combined experimental longitudinal design was used to test the efficacy of the intervention. Following a baseline assessment of violent TV, movie, and video game use, time 1, 627 7th and 8th graders were assigned to the 5-week intervention or a no intervention control group. The main outcome measures were media violence use, nonviolent media use, and self-reported aggressive behavior, measured about 7 months post-intervention, time 2, and at 2 further data waves, another 12 months, time 3, and 24 months, time 4, later. Crahy and Bushing, 2015. Participants in the intervention group reported a significantly lower use of violent media at time 2 than did participants in the control group, and the effect extended indirectly to time 3 and time 4. As expected, no effect of the intervention was found on nonviolent media use, which is consistent with the content of the intervention directed specifically at the use of violent media. Participants in the intervention group also showed less aggressive behavior at time 3, which was mediated by reduced exposure to violent media at time 2. By time 4, the indirect intervention effect via the reduction of media violence use was no longer significant. However, given that the intervention lasted no more than 5 weeks, seeing an effect after 18 months may be regarded as evidence of its efficacy, and the finding that an intervention effect could no longer be detected at 30 months post-intervention is not unexpected. Beyond demonstrating that reducing exposure to violent media may successfully reduce aggressive behavior, the combined experimental longitudinal design of the study provided a more stringent test of the causal link between media violence use and aggressive behavior than could be achieved by either experimental or longitudinal designs alone. While it would clearly be unethical to run a longitudinal study in which participants are assigned to a high dose of exposure to media violence over extended periods to observe increases in aggressive behavior, it is perfectly ethical to try to experimentally reduce the exposure to media violence in order to examine a reduction of aggressive behavior. By demonstrating the path from reduced exposure as a result of the intervention on reduced aggression, the study by Crahy and Bushing, 2015, provides evidence for a causal impact of media violent use on aggressive behavior. A further approach to prevention seeks to reduce exposure to media violence by restricting access to violent media content by children and adolescents. Various age classification systems have been developed to designate media with violent content as unsuitable for certain age groups. For a summary of the most common rating systems in the U.S., see Bushman and Cantor, 2003. However, empirical studies have revealed several problems with rating systems. First, many parents are not familiar with the ratings or do not use them to regulate their children's media access. Second, media rated as suitable for children and adolescents often contain substantial levels of violence, and there appears to be a trend over time towards greater tolerance of violent content in media that are accessible to a young audience. An analysis of movies rated between 1950 and 2006 found a steady increase in violent content in films rated as PG-13, designated as containing content inappropriate for children under 13 years of age. Third, ratings are often not matched by consumer perceptions of the same titles, especially with regard to cartoons and fantasy games, and also media that contains some degree of violence, all of which undermines their perceived validity. Finally, and probably the most difficult to overcome, warning labels have been found to enhance the appeal of violent media to those they should protect, demonstrating a forbidden fruit effect. Bajank et al., 2009, asked children and adolescents to rate the attractiveness of versions of the same video games that were presented with different age recommendations or with different violent content indicators taken from the PEGI system. Consistent with their predictions, the authors found that adding an age label to a video game made it more attractive to children under the indicated age, and that adding a warning label about violent content increased the attractiveness of the game, particularly to boys. These findings raise questions about the effectiveness of rating systems and highlight the challenges involved in protecting children and adolescents from exposure to violent media content.